Greetings, all you lovers of lore and legend, whether student, teacher, parent, philological nerd, or time-traveling giant seeking to find out just how much we know.
The Great Tales is a podcast about myths and legends from both inside and outside the Christian tradition, and we come to you live on the first and third Thursdays of the month, mostly, to talk about the great stories that Orthodox Christians have been reading and passing on for centuries, sometimes even longer than that.
In our last two episodes, we introduced the Iliad, a truly epic. Who writes this copy? From the Greek mythological world that serves as a foundational text for much of Western culture. Today, we're headed up north to the wild, icy Viking lands filled with cheap furniture berserkers and lutefisk to talk about the Prose Edda, one of the two most important texts for understanding Norse mythology.
Yeah, and it's basically a sequel to the Iliad, right?
It actually is.
Yes.
The premise of most of what I have done in public over the last 3 years is that everything is a sequel to the Iliad.
Yeah. It's a little less epic, of course, but no less awesome. Norse mythology haunts the literature and the pop culture of the English-speaking world in everything from Middle-earth to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from Skyrim to the Space Marines. And if you knew names like Thor, Odin, or Loki, not to mention names like Gandalf, Thorin, Dori, Nori, and Ori, or mythic creatures like the Valkyries or the Frost Giants, then you have been influenced by Norse myth. Our modern concepts of elves and dwarves have their sources in this mythology as well. But what do we really know about these stories? Where do we get them? Do they represent actual Norse pagan religion? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So
did you just out yourself as a Space Wolves player, or because there's only one Space Marine chapter that is actually connected to Norse mythology?
I'm adjacent to a lot of things. I'll just put it that way.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Actually, that's kind of a theme of this podcast, isn't it? Things are adjacent.
Yes.
Things are just adjacent. So yeah, I mean, we were talking actually before we went on the air here. We were talking about the sources of Norse myth, right? And this is a big contrast. So we were just in the Iliad, which is this immense multi-thousand line poem of a huge corpus of mythology from the Greek and Roman world, right? I mean, there is a lot of text that you can read that's Greek and Roman mythology, classical mythology, written by pagans, written by the people who practice these religions and so forth. And then we head up north, and what do we got, Richard? What are the sources of Norse mythology?
The sources of Norse mythology are your grandmother. And what I mean by this, well, maybe not your grandmother, certainly my grandmother, or one of my grandmother's grandmothers. So we have these two documents, the really sort of collections of documents. One is sort of by a single author. We'll come back to that. And this one that we'll be talking about today, called the Prose Edda. The other is a collection, certainly never, how do I put this? It's not what anybody ever wanted it to be. Let's say that. But it's a collection of disparate pieces of poetry written at different times, usually called the Poetic Edda, or sometimes the Elder Edda. There's a lot of debate about what Edda means, the word Edda, but it probably means something like your grandmother, or a story your grandmother would have told you, right? Yeah. These are the old stories. This is the old, to use a good Germanic word, this is the old lore. And these two sources, and essentially, the Elder Edda, which is this collection of old poetry, Old Norse poetry, and it was collected in a certain way, and then we only really have two extant copies of it, and the best one was basically lost, forgotten in somebody's barn until they found it later.
That's how it always goes.
So it's a manuscript. It's a collection of like the old poetry, and then we have the Prose Edda, and basically the Prose Edda is written by this guy named Snorri Sturluson, who we'll introduce in a moment.
Yep.
And what Snorri does is he takes some of the old poetry, And without getting into this too much, there's actually several different genres of Old Norse poetry. There's the what's called the poetry or the verses of olden times, and that kind of poetry is the main kind of poetry that we'll be using today. And then there's also the scaldic poetry, which is its own very particular genre with its own very particular genre conventions. And most of the Prose Edda is engaged in trying to explain the conventions of scaldic poetry, which are at this time in history beginning to die out.
Yeah, I mean, spoiler alert, though, you know. But I just want to underline this for everybody, that the actual sources of Norse mythology are very sparse, very sparse. So I've got my copy of the Prose Edda here with me, and you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it's not a huge book. It's decent sized. Now, a significant chunk of this is introduction written by a scholar, and there's, you know, index in the back. But, you know, it's most of this is the good stuff. The Poetic Edda is a book about the same size, maybe a little bit smaller. Yeah. And these are the main sources. There are also lots of sagas, but the sagas are not the stories of the gods.
Yeah, well, mostly.
Mostly, yeah. Sometimes they do show up.
So there's a distinction between poetry and prose. So a saga is a primarily prose work. The saga, saya means the said thing, right? The same word is our word to say.
Yeah, it's cognate with say and said. Yeah.
Actually, that's also what epic means, epos. But anyway, but in this particular case, it's the said thing. It's a prose story, and in particular, it's a way of telling a prose story with certain, you know, its own genre conventions that is really perfected in 14th century Iceland, but shows up before then and after then as well, throughout the Scandinavian territories. And I will just say, and this is free with the price of admission, everyone, that the majority of sagas are the Haligaman sagas, the sagas of holy men. That is, the vast majority of sagas which were read and written by people in medieval Scandinavia and Iceland are hagiography. And in fact, when you read sagas, the sagas that the people in the sagas are reading are almost always hagiography.
Oh.
So there's
the saga within the saga.
There's a fun example in a famous Icelandic saga, and we're gonna get to all of this one of these days.
Yeah,
you know, 80 episodes from now.
Infinite list of sources.
There's an example in a famous Icelandic saga, in what are called the Icelandic family sagas, the sagas of the Icelanders, and the main character in the saga. Spoiler alert, I guess, as Father Andrew would say. I personally do not believe in spoilers, but in any case, the main character is going to die when he's betrayed and beheaded. Okay, but at a pivotal point in the story, they're all sitting there around the fire and they're reading a saga. But the saga they're reading is the saga of Thomas à Becket.
How about that?
Who, of course, you know, was a huge saint in the in the northern part of Europe at that particular time, who also was betrayed and beheaded. So
yeah. So
anyway.
All right. So all of that is to say that we have very little to go on. Like, I'm sure most people who are listening to this probably have some sense of Norse myth, like, you know, maybe some certain stories and names and stuff. But you should know that almost every single one of the big stories that you think of from Norse myth is like a paragraph,
right,
in the Prose Edda, and really, like, that's all it is. So most of what you're probably used to reading or seeing, or whatever, is essentially a kind of fan fiction, really, in a lot of ways, or a kind of an expansion on these sources.
I think that the important thing to emphasize is the fact that these are stories which were preserved and retold by Christians many hundreds of years after they had already, in many cases, ceased to be. Of course, this is not a history lesson, but the conversion of Iceland happened rather late, and like the Scandinavian, like, the farther north you go, like Christianity in Europe goes east to west and south to north.
Right.
So the conversion of the Scandinavian speaking peoples happens quite late for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
But when Snorri is writing this stuff down, it's because it's already ceased to be a matter of primary belief.
Right.
And,
I mean, Christianity becomes the official religion of Iceland in the year 1000, which is a wonderfully convenient number to remember.
Yeah, real easy to remember.
And Snorri, his dates: born 1179, died 1241. As you can see, he was not an old guy, although moderately old for the time.
He did die in the most Icelandic way, though.
Yes, a group of guys come into his house and kill him.
Yep. He was murdered.
Yes.
The thing, and I think I sort of alluded, but I misspoke at the end of the last episode. But essentially, Snorri is his foster brother is a bishop, and he's from this sort of very wealthy, powerful Icelandic family, and he is sort of raised along with his foster brother to go into the service of the church. But then his foster brother becomes bishop, and Snorri becomes a law speaker.
Yes, so a law speaker. There is actually still a position of law speaker in Iceland now. And it seems that this job was literally what it says on the label. Like, he would read out the laws, but it's kind of almost like the Speaker of the House. He's sort of the presider in Parliament. And I have to say that I love the name of the Icelandic Parliament. It's I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it. I don't know Norse at all, so any good Norse pronunciation today is going to have to come from you, Richard. But it's the all thing, or all.
Yeah,
thing.
I mean that's right.
Okay.
It's the thing, the all thing. Yeah.
And this is the great thing about this word. It is exactly what it looks like. It's the all thing. Okay. Now, this is our word thing, but this is actually the older sense of thing. Which is making a comeback in English anyway. Whenever you say, "Oh, I have to go to a thing,"
or it's going to be a whole thing if we have that discussion,
you are actually using the most ancient version of this word. So the thing, or the ting, depending on time and place, I guess, is a meeting. It's a meeting, particularly of people who are going to decide something. Yeah. So now, of course, we use thing to mean sort of any object or whatever. But yes, that's what it is. So the all thing is that's the big moot, to use the old English word. The Witangamut, I think, is what they would call that. Roughly the same idea. And that's what he did. He functioned as a politician in the Icelandic all thing. And he led it. So he was a big deal. He was very, very well known. He's a historian. He's a poet. And, it's basically politics that gets him killed in the end. It's not that someone read the Prose Edda and decided, that he had to end it.
Yeah, that'll be important to emphasize in a moment. Yeah, the word thing is... it's in every Germanic language. It comes from an old Proto-Germanic word. You could say like the Germanic speech at the time of Christ, which basically means the scheduled time, or the appointed time for something to happen. And then, then it becomes like the time that we're going to have the big meeting, and then it becomes, the actual meeting. But in English, it took kind of a different direction, and it became the idea of like the case that we're going to discuss, the matter we're going to discuss, the issue that we're going to discuss, and then the moot was the meeting. But
and I just checked it. I just looked at the chat real quick, by the way, and someone was asking about the translation that we're using. And so the one that I have, and the one that we're going to be quoting from today, is by Anthony Fawkes, and this is the Everyman edition, which is great. I love Everyman editions. They have good, solid scholarship. Nice translations, usually not very expensive.
It's always kind of funny to me. I probably more than any question that I get people I don't know emailing me or messaging me on Twitter or something like that, and asking what's the best translation for this work, as though as though like, and I think some of this is like our, for ex-evangelicals out there, it's like this hang up around like Bible translations. I think
canon,
this idea that
right.
like, man, if I just read the right translation, then I'm going to really, really understand this. Now, there are some translations that are better than others, and sometimes I have strong feelings about this. For most things, if you get the Everyman edition or the Penguin Classics edition of the thing, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, these are usually top scholars.
Right.
Here's the thing. Almost every time I've been asked what's the best translation for whatever, the answer I'm going to give is basically, I like this one because I'm not a translator. I'm not a scholar of, in this case, Old Norse. I will say, fun tip, everybody. If you learn modern Icelandic,
you can read
Old Norse.
Yeah.
So
people say it's actually much better to do that because then you also functionally speak a living language.
You learn Icelandic.
I personally refuse to do things that are useful, and so I really tried hard to get the Old Norse pronunciation down. But
someone's going to put that on a T-shirt sometime, Richard, and give it to you as a gift. I refuse to do things that are useful.
I like there's a translation out there, by the way, by Jesse Byock, which I like a lot.
I've seen a number of things by him as well. And I know that a lot of people
he's a very well-regarded Old Norse scholar.
Jackson Crawford is another big name for some of this stuff.
Jackson's great. Yeah. I don't know if he's done a whole translation of the Prose Edda, though.
I don't know.
I know that he's done Havamal and some other things. But,
some of this stuff in the same kind of world. And I'll say, by the way, everybody, I know. I see in the chat, people are like, oh, are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about this? Yes, God willing, we're going to get to a lot of those things. We're not
even into our second page of notes. So
right. I mean,
and I'm already derailing things.
And this is only this is our fourth episode of this podcast that God willing, we're going to do for years. So
reading the chat
so buckle up, everybody. This is just episode 4. So why did he write this book? What is it? You mentioned this earlier. It's a textbook. That's what it is. He's not saying, and here's a collection of Norse mythology.
But what it is not, it's a textbook, but it is not a mythological textbook. As in, it's not like here's a compendium of everything on like. And I have a couple of those books. Actually, one over here on my Old Norse shelf that's quite good. If you just want a collection of here's everything we think we know about Norse mythology.
Yes,
that is not what this is.
That's not what this is. This is a textbook for poets. It's for poets. Right. It's for skaldic poets. And the way I've had it, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but the way I've had it explained to me is that skaldic poetry is kind of on the wane when he writes this,
and it does not die out at this point in time, probably in large part thanks to the efforts of Snorri and people like him who are trying to keep it going.
Yeah. So what he's doing is he's saying, okay, look, people are kind of losing this skill. I'm going to put together a textbook to kind of codify the basic stories that everyone needs to know, because when you're writing the poetry, the vocabulary of the poetry consists significantly of references to these stories.
Right.
And so it's like if we don't really have anything equivalent in English, but imagine that you could only write that your poetry largely had to make references to William Shakespeare in order to be understandable to anybody, or to fit the so you had to be able to say like, oh, that's a real Romeo and Juliet situation. Oh yes, it's now the winter of our discontent. Like you need to be able to quote Shakespeare. You need to know the stories. And that's the way that you do this.
So let me give a couple of examples. So in Germanic poetry, first of all, as I mentioned, there's the Fornyrðislag, which is the meter of ancient times. That's the stuff that you find in the Elder Edda, the poetic Edda, sometimes it's called. Skaldic poetry, there are a few different metrical forms. I think this would be a really great time actually for me to just spend the next 3 hours explaining Old Norse meter if you want to do that. No,
okay,
just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah, right. No, okay. So it's very complex. It's got very complex metrical forms. Notably, it's alliterative meter. And although there are forms of skaldic poetry that also work in things like rhyme and assonance, so it's very complex. Skaldic poetry is really, really tight. An entire skaldic poem is something like 8 lines. Okay, but it's a very jam-packed 8 lines, and in that jam-packed 8 lines, what you're trying to do and this is the artistry, like every poetic language has its own genius, and the genius of Germanic poet languages is to say as much as you can with as few words as possible.
Yes.
By the way, this is the opposite of the Greek poetic genius.
Say as little as you can, and as long as possible.
Which is to, if something is worth saying, you may as well keep saying it for a long time, you know.
That's right.
And which is certainly how our services are kind of composed, right? They're very effusive.
That's
They're very,
right. As Orthodox Christians, if there's a longer way to say something, we will absolutely find it.
And you may as well just get used to that. But okay, so in Germanic poetry, what you want to do is take a verse and in that single verse, pack in as many allusions as you can. But the way that you do this is by is through something called a kenning. So if you've ever taken like a Beowulf course or something like that, then you'll be familiar with the basic idea of a kenning. But what skaldic poetry does is it will take a well-known kenning and it will make another kenning out of it. So in some skaldic poetry, you get kennings that are actually 3 or 4 references deep.
Yeah.
And so to know, so I'll give a simple example. This is not one of the more complicated ones, but a simple example. A common kenning in Old Norse poetry is Grani's burden.
Yes.
Right? Which of course means gold.
Yes.
But I only know that
Grani
because I know the story.
That's right. Or, I mean, another one, and it's actually, there are multiple kennings that refer to gold. Another classic one is Sif's hair.
Right. Sif's hair, Grani's burden.
And it doesn't mean, you know, if there's a reference to Sif's hair or Sif's hair, it doesn't mean that she's in the poem.
Yeah.
It's you could say, oh, I reached into my pocket and there was Sif's hair.
So
meaning I had some gold in my pocket.
So here's a little poem from 985. I'll just read it in translation.
Okay.
I ask the tester of monks for a safe journey. The lord of the palace of the high ground, keep the seat of the falcon over me. All right, so who's the tester of monks? Who tests monks? God does.
God does, yeah.
Right? Who's the lord of the palace of the high ground? Again, this is also God, which is like a little multi-part kenning. What's the seat of the falcon? Where does the falcon sit?
Mountain.
On my hand.
Oh, on your hand. Excuse me.
It's saying well, if he's a lord, where does the lord keep his falcon? He keeps it on his hand, right?
Gotcha. See,
and so
it just shows I've not gone to the Snorri Sturluson school of skaldic poetry.
So I like to point this one out. This is a Christian prayer, I think, from the Hebrides.
Cool.
But anyway, this is a Christian prayer. Right, and so that somebody wrote down in this skaldic verse form called Hirnhenda, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But in any case, so the idea of this poem is we don't just say, I could just say, I ask God to keep his hand on me while I travel, right?
Which is great.
Nobody would have remembered that later.
But a little boring, yeah.
A little boring, yeah. And so that's the idea of the kenning. Well, a lot of the kennings, as I mentioned, are quite complicated, and they heavily use different mythological references. Yeah. And sometimes mythological references that are themselves references to other mythological references.
Yes.
But if you have forgotten all of the mythological references because it's been 100 years since anybody worshipped this way, or then eventually
200 probably by this point,
or 200,
just about, the
stock phrases, and it's important because these are kind of Germanic poetry uses a lot of what are called uses a lot of what is sometimes called it's very formulaic, right? It uses a lot of formulas, and these are really important. So as a teaser for maybe a future episode or my Beowulf course, if anybody wants to go listen to that, there's a formula that's used throughout not just Beowulf, but all Anglo-Saxon poetry, which introduces a monster from before the flood.
Hmm.
And if you know what that formula is, when you come across it, you'd be like, aha, this is a reference to the Book of Enoch, which, by the way, the Anglo-Saxons had their own translation of.
Yeah.
And if you, but if you don't know that, then you'll just you'll just see it as, oh, this is just this random dead, nice poetic flourish or something like that. You don't realize it's an actual formula that introduces something.
Right. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, Snorri is the kind of nerd,
right,
that we love best.
Yes.
Right. He's
so
like,
what he's doing
there's this old stuff, you guys, like we need to keep doing this. Let me lay it all out for you.
So what Snorri is doing is he's collecting. And so when you read the Edda, what you'll find is you get a block of prose, and then you get a little bit of poetry. And this is what is called a prosymmetrical work. That is, it's prose and meter.
We'll be including we'll be including a number of things like that today.
Yeah. And so the reason is so the poems you come across are not things that Snorri wrote. This is old poetry.
Yeah, this
is poetry so old that in most cases nobody knows who wrote it. He'll say, for instance, he'll say something like, "It is as the Vala said." By the way, Vala, it's not a deity from Tolkien's mythology in this case. It's a word or a particular kind of word for an Old Norse pagan seeress, that is a female prophetess, right? Like an oracle. And so what he'll do is he'll quote like this old poem from like the oracle. And so you get a block of text that explains it, and then he says, now here's the poem. And then a block of text that explains it, now here's the poem. And the point is that you'll understand the allusions so that you'll be able to then use the formula as you're composing your own skaldic poetry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good textbook in terms of explaining, demonstrating, it's great for that.
But it is not totally clear, and I just have to say this because while there are probably no neo-pagans watching this, there's certainly a whole kind of a thing of people out there who are trying to reconstruct some kind of old Germanic paganism, some kind of old European paganism, and they basically create their own religion around this, and it's a religion which has absolutely nothing to do with ancient Germanic paganism. I mean, really nothing at all to do with
it. It really doesn't. And the thing you got to know is that all of our sources for Norse mythology are written by Christians.
Several hundred years, in most cases, after the fact.
Christians who had never worshipped Thor. Christians who had never met a Norse pagan. The only real evidence that we have, solid evidence that we can really point at as being, okay, this is authentically Norse paganism. The only real evidence that we have for that is all archaeological.
Right. And it's mostly slaves who were drowned in bogs.
Yeah, digging up sacrificial
lots of human sacrifice.
Lots of human sacrifice.
So I want to point this out and really drive this home because it is not clear to us how much of this Snorri gets right.
We don't know.
Very obviously, there are very obviously places where Snorri himself and nobody else living around him actually remembers what this is a reference to. Not so much in today's, what we're going to read today, but later on in the Prose Edda, there are many cases where it's really not clear actually at all that anybody remembers what the actual story is. And it seems as though Snorri sort of makes something up. And the places where he makes things up they're evident because they're the parts that maybe seem to fit less. They're also usually the funnier parts.
Yes, that's right.
So
so that's the thing, is that there is no, like, if you're looking for a pure, pristine, unchristianized, unfiltered Norse paganism, that does not exist.
I'll go a step further and say that even the Elder Edda, like the old stuff,
which
it's not.
We don't even know that it's elder than this.
Well, I mean, the poetry is definitely elder in the sense that. Well, probably. I mean, on philological grounds, the poetry is definitely older. I would definitely confidently say that there is stuff in the Elder Edda that represents the oldest examples of Germanic poetry we have,
but we should say
Old
that
Norse poetry we have
we
extant.
don't have like manuscript attestations.
No. But I mean, there's stuff in the Elder Edda that is obviously, you know, 5th or 6th century. But the point that I'm trying to make though is that even in the Elder Edda, it's not clear that those stories, which were being, you know, let's say composed by pagans, were done without influence from Christianity.
Right.
A lot of the stuff that has to do with like the creation of the world and the end of the world, like the really apocalyptic stuff, which is like the like Ragnarok and all the stuff that people are really into.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is probably a result of Christian influence before the Germanic conversion.
Yeah. So there's a number of different ways that Christianity gets into the Norse myth.
Right.
One of the ways is Christians who are writing it down and maybe editing it, maybe adding stuff to it, maybe highlighting the parts that they think are the best. But then also Norse pagans interacting with Christians and simply absorbing, because the way that religion, especially pagan religion, works, it's not like, oh, we have this body of beliefs and this, like, we have a Bible of our own. No, that's not the way it is. It's very absorbent. It's very, and
you know, I the reason I want to emphasize this is because people do this stupid thing where when they come across, I'm really, really sorry. I just have to get the rant out of my system and talk about what it is. Just let me get this out. All right, people do this stupid thing where when they come across something that is in some other world religion that is similar to Christianity, they say, "Oh, obviously Christianity was influenced by this other thing."
Right.
And the influence never goes the other way. And so I've run into people who have said, "Oh, the story of Jesus being crucified, that's actually just from the story of Odin hanging himself on the world tree,"
which is like on its face. Okay,
insane.
As I say, on its face, that's hilarious. Like even if you believe that the Odin story is completely pre-Christian, completely not influenced by Christianity, which actually I kind of think it probably is. Even if you believe that, the dates don't work out, people.
Right.
When Jesus is crucified on the cross, and there's 1st century attestations to that, no one there had ever heard of Norse mythology.
I will not have any time to explain this today, but Odin is a significantly later deity in the Norse pantheon.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about Tacitus, I guess, but Tacitus doesn't seem to know anything about, and we don't even know what Tacitus really knows about the people in Germania. In any case, Odin is a significantly later deity, and if there's any influence, it's from Christianity into Norse mythology. Almost
all right, so I'll stop ranting.
Okay.
Now.
Okay. So I'm going to give a quick sort of table of contents of what's in the book, because this is important.
Yep.
There are basically 4 parts in the Prose Edda. You've got the prologue. Okay. And this is essentially it answering the question, where did the Norse come from? That's what the prologue is about. We're going to cover some stuff in the prologue. You've got the Gylfi, which means the tricking of Gylfi. Again, I'm mispronouncing these things, but that's okay. The tricking of Gylfi, it's an overview of the Norse creation, and it's some of the primary myths. This is kind of like, if you want the good stuff, this is the part you want to read. Like, this is the part that has most of the stories that you're familiar with, or you might want to become familiar with. And we're going to spend most of our time on that today. And then the third part is the Skaldskaparmal. And this is basically a list of the kennings in the form of a dialogue between the giant Aegir and Bragi, the god of poetry. Okay. So it's a dialogue, and it's listing off these kennings. Again, this is a textbook, everybody. So, of course, there's going to be lists, indices, right? And then the fourth part
people in the Middle Ages really like lists, by the way.
Oh, yes. Encyclopedias. And then there's the Hatatal, which is a discussion of the various verse forms of the poetry that Snorri is working on. So those are the 4 parts: prologue, Gylfi, Skaldskaparmal, and the Hatatal. And today we're not going to be talking about the Skaldskaparmal or the Hatatal, although Richard has basically kind of given you
the Hatatal is the one that like has the Hjorthenda, which is the flowing verse form, which is seems to be the main kind of poetry story once you didn't learn how to write. And so he spends Hatatal basically explaining like, here's like 3 different variants of Hirnhenda and here's how you write them and stuff like that. It's actually really exciting for people who don't get invited to parties.
It's just not the right kind of party, Richard. That's all.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But you have to understand that back in the day, these are exactly the kind of people you wanted at your party, because you know what? There's no Spotify, and there's no
movie. They're not all gathering together to watch The Shining together.
Exactly.
So
it's like if you want to have a good party, you're going to have a skald, and the skald has to know how to make good poems.
Yeah, you want this guy. Please put a couple of kroners in his guitar case.
Right.
So we're going to be discussing some bits from the prologue and the Gylfi, and we're going to especially focus on the creation stories. Okay.
All right.
And a couple of the other big hits that are sort of connected to that. Don't worry, everybody. All the things you're like, wait, you didn't talk about this. You didn't talk about this. You didn't talk about this. We will come back to that stuff. And again,
if somebody would just keep a list.
We do have a list.
Yeah,
we actually do have a list, and it's getting longer every day.
Yeah,
I just added Robin Hood to that list today, actually. So let's begin with the prologue. And Richard, why don't you begin? This is the very beginning of the prologue of one of the main sources of Norse mythology. So why don't you go ahead and read that?
Almighty God created heaven and earth and all things in them, and lastly, 2 humans, from whom all generations are descended, Adam and Eve, and their stock multiplied and spread over all the world. But as time passed, mankind became diverse. Some were good and orthodox in faith, but many more turned aside to follow the lusts of the world and neglected God's commandments. Many such cases. And so God drowned the world in a flood together with all creatures in the world except those who were in the ark with Noah. After Noah's flood, there lived 8 people who inhabited the world, and from them generations have descended. And it happened just as before, that as the world came to be peopled and settled, it turned out to be that the vast majority of mankind that cultivated desire for wealth and glory and neglected obedience to God, and this reached such a pass that they refused to mention the name of God. But who was there then to tell their children of the mysteries of God? So it happened that they forgot the name of God, and in most parts of the world, there was no one to be found who knew anything about his creator. And
that's the beginning of Norse mythology, everybody.
There you go. There you go.
It begins with Genesis. How about that? Yeah, it's funny. If you don't know anything about any of this or any of the stuff that we just said about the very Christian wrapping that all of this is in, you might be a little shocked. But this is how Snorri begins this. So it's important from his point of view, that a skald be a Christian, right? And that he understand where these stories actually arise from, and the actual origins of all of this. So yeah, this is the beginning of Norse mythology. It's Christian, but as we said at the beginning, this also happens to be a sequel to the Iliad. Surprise, surprise. As Richard said, his whole life is dedicated to things that might be regarded as sequels to the Iliad.
That's right.
But it just so happens actually that a huge amount of particularly European legends and stories and whatever all are trying to reach back to Troy.
Yep.
So here's the next part that we're going to read. I'll read this bit myself. Near the middle of the world was constructed that building and dwelling which has been the most splendid ever, which was called Troy. We call the land there Turkey. This place was built much larger than others and with greater skill in many respects, using the wealth and resources available there. 12 kingdoms were there and 1 high king, and many countries were subject to each kingdom. In the city there were 12 chief languages. The 12 rulers of the kingdoms were superior to other people who have lived in the world in all human qualities. So there's a lot going on there. Some fun numerology. 12 keeps showing up over and over again. Very important Christian number. But just a number that's important in many religious traditions, actually. It's sort of a number of completion and greatness and fullness and all that stuff. Note that this is depicted as a vast empire with multiple countries and kingdoms within it.
I just have to say, by the way, it's not Turkey, it's Tyrkland. But anyway,
Turkland, yeah,
Tyrkland.
Yeah, because by this point, especially by this point, right, 12th century, 13th century,
right?
I mean, Constantinople has not been, although actually he gets sacked by the Crusaders during his lifetime, during Snorri's lifetime.
Why did Constantinople get the works?
Actually, that's Smarty's business in addition to the Turks.
Yes, it actually is.
Yes. As the four lads sang.
Yes, as the four lads sang.
Long before they might be giants. Just putting that out there. But so I thought this was interesting, and this kind of actually is a little bit of a telegraphing of some of what we're going to see as we go here, which is he says the 12 rulers of the kingdoms were superior to other people who have lived in the world in all human qualities. Now, when he says superior, he doesn't just mean that they're better looking, taller, stronger, whatever. They are magical. They have powers, right? They are heroes. They're wizards. They're whatever. That's going to be an important element of what we're talking about here. How common is that in all this universal history stuff that you've read, this idea that the rulers of Troy are like better?
Yeah, absolutely.
Way better.
I mean, Priam is somebody who was, favorite of the gods, and most of the great heroes of Troy, with, important exceptions, as we talked about in the last couple of weeks, are demigods or, descendants of the gods in some way. But yeah, the idea that, I mean, this is something that certainly comes up, you could say even in the, even during the, in the Iliad, it'll often talk about, somebody will pick up a rock, like Ajax will pick up a rock or something, and it will explain, now this rock is much larger than any rock that anybody could pick up today. But back then, when men were men, when men still had like the blood of the gods in them, like people could do feats of strength like this.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, why don't you go ahead and read this next section as we move along through the prologue here.
Yeah. So the name of one king there, that is at Troy, was Munon or Menon, not related to the founder of the Mennonites as far as I know, possibly related to Memnon from the Trojan cycle, who's actually the king of Ethiopia. Are Scandinavians actually Ethiopians? Maybe. He was married to the daughter of the high king Priam. She was called Troan. They had a son. He was called Tror. We call him Thor. He was brought up in Thrace, so Thor, Thrace, by a duke. Yes, by a duke whose name was Loricus. When he was 10, he inherited his father's weapons. He was as beautiful to look at when he came among other people as when ivory is inlaid in oak. By the way, this is a good line.
Yeah.
This is a good line. You are as beautiful to look at as ivory inlaid in oak. His hair is more beautiful than gold. When he was 12, he had reached his full strength. Then he lifted, remember the strength is one of the indicators, from the ground 10 bear skins all at once. And then he killed his foster father Loricus and his wife Laura or Glora and took possession of the realm of Thrace. We call this Thrudheim. When he traveled through many countries and explored all quarters of the world and defeated unaided all the berserks and giants and one of the greatest dragons and many wild animals.
Many such cases.
In the northern part of the world, he came across a prophetess called Sibyl, whom we call Sif, and married her. No one is able to tell Sif's ancestry. She was the most beautiful of all women. Her hair was like gold.
Right. And that's why, kids, when you're watching the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff regarding the Asgardians, and you see Sif, I mean, I don't remember the actress's name. She's a lovely woman. Lovely long black hair. I'm like, you're breaking one of the most commonly used kennings in this literature by making her black haired. I understand what's his name? Chris Hemsworth, Hemingway, whatever his name is. He's blonde, of course. So you need to have a brunette girlfriend, whatever. But Sif's hair literally means gold. Anyway, just had to throw that one out there. When I saw that, I was like, wait, what? That can't be Sif. It's Sif. No.
Yeah, it's funny because you said something like, "Oh, the versions of Norse mythology you think you know." Like everybody out there, like I think what most people think they know mostly comes from the Marvel films today, especially.
It may be, which good for them. I mean, I think it's great the level of creativity that they put into all of that. Whatever.
But the Hulk is not going to show up in today's episode. Like it's
no. Oh yeah. Yeah. So again, like here we see Snorri engaging in some philology, right? He's saying that the name Thor, Tror, Thrace, he's linking all these things up, all these words that his Norse readers would have known, and saying we get these words from the Greek area, from the Mediterranean.
Now this
all comes from there.
We'd say this doesn't hold up to sort of modern etymological practices.
No.
But the point is that people would read and they notice, this word is similar to this word, and this person is similar to this person. Maybe they're connected, right? So he's trying to draw some lines. We'll talk, I guess we can talk now about why it's important to draw those lines.
Yeah. So this introduces what in scholarly literature is called euhemerization. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, euhemerization, which is essentially this idea that pagan gods are humans from back in the day who are become so important.
Mighty men, one might say. Men of great renown. Men of renown, one might say.
Who get worshipped, right?
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily wrong.
No.
And it's not Snorri saying that I don't believe that these gods exist.
Right.
Because, look what it says here about Thor, whom he's saying is a human, a great human.
Like a real person who lived. Yeah.
Full strength at 12 years old, killed lots of bears and giants and dragons. He's clearly in berserks. Yes. Bear shirt people,
or possibly bear shirt people.
Yes, bears. We're gonna have to talk about werebears a lot in future episodes, I'm sure. Or there are whole sagas about werebears
and whether or not they beat Battlestar Galactica.
Do they eat beets? So, yes, this is, the Bible contains elements of this idea of essentially saying that that great humans come to be worshipped as gods, but also includes the idea that demons are being worshipped as gods. Sometimes that dead humans that have become demons are worshipped as gods. Like it's all there. Like it's not one story or another. It's all there. I mean,
even Zeus, as everybody knew, comes from the island of Crete. Like everybody knew that even like the most, you could say, sort of like iconic gods, right, had some kind of went back to these particular places. And most of the deities that people actually worshipped in the ancient world, like nobody in Ephesus or nobody in Athens is like, okay, well, all right, I went to the Temple of Zeus today, and now I got to make the rounds. So Hades doesn't get angry or something like this, right? It's very much like gods are very, very localized, and most of your localized deities were your heroes, and a hero is the person who founded the altar, who set up the hearth, because those are the same thing, of the city where you live. Aeneas is a god. He's also the historical person who's the origin of the Latin race, at least if you ask people who know.
Yeah.
But it's the same. So it's the same kind of a thing here. Like euhemerization, a lot of modern scholars use euhemerization as this sort of way to basically they write it off. I mean, when you study the Prose Edda in like a university class, they'll spend 5 minutes talking about the prologue and then move on because it's not interesting to them.
Right.
Like it doesn't really matter. It's just Christians trying to explain the stuff away. Now let's get on to the good bits.
No.
And
Right.
and one of the implications in this, by the way, is this idea that Snorri was trying to basically censor, Scandinavian paganism, but it was apparently very bad at it. And so the way that they treat it is the prologue is all this Christian propaganda, and then everything else after this we can just take at face value.
Right. Which is hilarious because, again, there's no pagans around.
Right.
The fact that these stories have survived means
Right.
that Christianity has digested it.
And and what this means, the thing that I want to propose is that Snorri did not invent this idea, right? That
Right.
he's not the first one to invent this or suggest this, but what he is writing down is rather a common understanding that connects, and this is the important thing, is that it connects his grandfather's world or his great-grandfather's world, connects that world to what in the Middle Ages they called the matter of Rome, which is the story of Greece and Rome and the story of the Trojan War.
Yeah, I mean, these are, among other things, these are the two big pieces of context that Snorri is bringing in here.
Yep.
And it's probably not original to him, right? It's Christianity.
No, I think it's definitely not original to him.
Yeah, it's Christianity and it's the Roman Empire. That's what he's plugging into for all of this. Okay, so I'm going to continue to read here, and so you've got Thor as introduced, and then generations pass. You get a number of bits about Thor's family, his descendants, and then you get to this descendant. So he here is one of his descendants, had a son whose name was Woden. It is him that we call Odin or Odin, if you're going to be more Norse about it. He was an outstanding person for wisdom and all kinds of accomplishments. His wife was Frigida, whom we call Frigg. Odin had the gift of prophecy, and so did his wife. And from this science, he discovered that his name would be remembered in the northern part of the world and honored above all kings. For this reason, he became eager to set off from Turkland, and took with him a very great following, young people and old, men and women, and they took with them many precious things. Whatever countries they passed through, great glory was spoken of them, so that they seemed more like gods than men. And they did not halt their journey until they came north to the country that is now called Saxony. Odin stayed there a long while and gained possession of stayed there a long while and gained possession of large parts of that land. So, again, this is following the same pattern of euhemerization. But notice that Odin is not Thor's dad in this telling. It's Odin is his distant descendant.
And by the way, this accurately reflects two important realities, which if you mostly know about Norse mythology from Marvel or Wikipedia or something, that you will be easily missed. One is that Thor was a much more important god than Odin, always was.
Yeah.
There's no Odin pendants that people wore. Not a thing. The other thing, though, is that archaeologically, we know that the worship of Odin, who Tacitus probably correctly identified with some version of Mercury, did come from the south. And it makes its way to Scandinavia rather late, historically speaking. And so here is an explanation for that whole sort of migration pattern. That they come up through Saxland, as it is in the Old Norse, and by the way, I mean, you'll appreciate this. We are also told the ways in which I don't think this is in the excerpt that we read, but we also get the lineage of the Volsungs in this section. So.
Yeah, and we definitely will will do at least one episode on Volsunga Saga, maybe a series.
A very cheery, happy story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, why don't you go ahead and continue on? This is the last bit that we're going to read here from the prologue.
Yeah. So Odin's gift of prophecy allows him to know that he's going to be worshipped as a god, and he sort of sets things up in place for this. So after that, Odin went north to teach to what is now called Sweden. There was a king whose name was Gylfi, and when he learned of the arrival of the men of Asia, who were called the Asir. Now, Snorri, sitting there, not just Snorri, like everybody, sitting there thinking, Asir, Asia, aha.
Sure sounds similar.
Aha.
Yeah.
When he learned of the arrival of the men of Asia, that is the Asir, he went to meet them and offered Odin as much power in his realm as he wished himself. And such was the success that attended their travels, that in whatever country they stopped, there was then prosperity and good peace there, and everyone believed that they were responsible for it, because the people who had power saw that they were unlike other people they had seen in beauty and wisdom. Odin found the conditions in the country attractive, and he selected as a site for his city the place which is now called Sigtunir. He also organized rulers there on the same pattern as had been in Troy, set up 12 chiefs in the place to administer the laws of the land, and he established all the legal system as it had previously been in Troy, and to which the Turks were accustomed. So this is the idea of the sort of the real story of Asgard, the Asgard, which originally is Troy, and so the Asgard. This is basically New Troy. By the way, in the ancient world, there were like 10 or 20 cities literally just named New Troy across Europe.
Right. Yeah. So Asir, it's basically the plural for God in Old Norse.
Right.
It's interesting, the idea that Asgard is basically Troy, or New Troy. They're trying to reestablish Troy up north, because these are Trojans who have come from all the way there. You know,
Rome is also New Troy. Britain is also New Troy.
Yeah. And I mean, when you get to the end of the prologue, like the very last paragraph basically tells how the Asir, they married in with the Germanic peoples, and then their, as he says it, their Asian language becomes the language of the whole region. So essentially, Snorri is saying that Old Norse comes from Troy. Even the language itself comes from Troy.
Right.
Which he's simply wrong about that. That's not the way that went down. But what is he doing? This is all serving the same project, which is that Norse civilization is directly descended from, and it's patterned after Troy in lots of major respects, like history, language, bloodlines, government. All of this is together. So this is very explicitly not just a Christianization, but also Romanization of the Norse story. And again, we have every reason to believe that Snorri is just passing this on, that this is not original to him. He's not inventing anything here at all. Right.
Yeah. Now, the next part will be original to Snorri.
Yeah. So this is called the Gylfaginning. So this means the deluding or the tricking of Gylfi. So,
or is it Gylfi tricking someone? Is it Gylfi tricking the audience?
What do you think? What's going on? So who is Gylfi? Right. First, he was mentioned in the prologue. He's a king of Sweden in the story.
Yep.
And so the way that the story goes is that he goes to Asgard because he's heard about the Aesir, and he wants to know, like, why are they so powerful? What's going on? I've been hearing all this great stuff about them. He goes there and he takes on this assumed name of Gangleri, and he shows up and he's taught Norse mythology. Is basically what the Gylfaginning
That's the frame narrative.
That's the frame narrative, right?
So, too many thoughts. They're all like Three Stooging their way, trying to get out of my mouth at the same time.
Well, that works because there's kind of a Three Stooges sort of telling all these stories.
Very much. Okay. Yeah. So the title, the deluding or the Gylfaginning, the tricking or the deluding of Gylfi, works on multiple levels. So first of all, there's the frame narrative. Now, academia is terrible in the way that they chop up parts of texts like the Edda and basically treat them as they are standalone texts on their own. So people will do just a study, just an edition of the Gylfi. And as I said before, people just write off the prologue. And so what sometimes people will say is that the tricking that's happening here is basically it's Odin tricking Gylfi into believing the euhemerization, and that's a way for Snorri to kind of like hide what he's doing from Christian censorship. A, Christian censorship not really a thing in Snorri's Iceland. B, that only makes sense if you didn't read the prologue. Because if you read the prologue, what happens is Odin shows up with all of these rich, powerful, magical people. Gylfi comes to him and he wants to know why they're so rich and powerful. By the way, the reason Gylfi wants to know why they're so rich and powerful is because he has just been taken for a ride by one of the women of the Aesir, and he is sore about it. So he shows up and he wants to know, what's your deal? Where did you come from? And that's when these three mysterious figures, about whom we will talk in a moment, High, Justice High, and Third, who are given to us seated in reverse order.
Yeah, High is not the highest. Yes. He's the lowest.
Yes, he's actually sitting the lowest. And then Justice High is sitting above him, so he's not Justice High. And then Third seems to be first. By the way, some people think this is like some kind of a weird Trinitarian reference. I don't think that's the case, but in any case. So you have High, Justice High, and Third, and they're telling the story. And it's obvious with the context of the prologue that Odin, who is magical and knows he's going to be worshipped as a god, is now telling us the false story of how the gods came to be, so that it will be passed on and people will worship him after he's dead. So that's one level the tricking of Gylfi is happening at. The other problem is, though, that Gylfi himself also seems to be magical. And so he takes on this new identity, this false name of Gangleri, to go and speak with the Aesir. The problem is that Gangleri is, as everyone knows, also one of the names of Odin.
Yes, and Odin, if you especially if you read the sagas,
right?
Odin likes to show up and pretend he's somebody else.
And Odin is, it's important to remember, he's a god of war, he's a god of poetry, and he is a trickster god. There's a reason he's associated with Mercurius, because he's mercurial, right? Yeah. And so and so there's this weird kind of thing happening where it's like Odin tricking Odin. And that's happening within a frame narrative of this man being tricked by Odin the man, which is happening within the frame narrative of, here's a book that will tell you how to be a poet, where your main job is to say things in the least plain way possible.
Yeah.
And so it is like the act of poetry, and certainly good poetry, is to reveal meaning by obscuring it, right? And the frame narrative of this book, which is essentially a manual for poets, does exactly that, which is to reveal the stories by hiding them within multiple layers of stories. Yeah. It is, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant things that anybody has ever done. And most scholars think that this next section, Gylfi, is Snorri's own composition. Now, the poems aren't. Obviously, all the poetry is old stuff. And we can tell because the vocabulary is older, and metrically it's too old for Snorri, et cetera, et cetera. But the frame narrative, and it's really actually, as I just badly explained, it's actually two nested frame narratives, is very obviously Snorri's own composition. And we know this for lots of reasons, but it seems to be his own composition. And to me, it's like it's one of the most brilliant things that you could have done. And certainly, if you could put yourself, and it's difficult unless you know a certain ghost in Reykjavik, but if you could put yourself, that's a real reference, by the way, if you could put yourself in the mind of a skaldic poet and kind of go back in time, this is the kind of thing you'd have been like, oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
And I I just love this so much. I love the prologue. I love the Gylfi, and it drives me crazy that almost nobody teaches them in any kind of an integrated way.
Yeah, and that's why we're taking this approach. Is they really, the one flows into the next. So here's kind of the first tale, so to speak, that that Gangleri gets from our Three Stooges. Now you've said that, I'm like, okay, that's who they are. They're the three Norse Stooges.
I accept it.
Who are telling these stories to him. So it says, Gangleri began his questioning thus: Who is the highest and most ancient of all gods? Hai said, he is called Allfather in our language, but in old Asgard he had 12 names. One is Allfather, the second Heron or Herion, the third Nikar or Hnikar, the fourth Nikus or Hnikud, the fifth Fjolnir, the sixth Olski, boy, this is like a tongue twister now, the seventh Omi, the eighth Biflidi or Biflindi, the ninth Svidar, the 10th Svirdrir, the 11th Virdrir, the 12th Yalg or Yalk. Then Gangleri said, where is this god? What power has he? And what great works has he performed? Hai said, he lives throughout all ages and rules all his kingdom and governs all things great and small. Then spoke just as Hai, he made heaven and earth and the skies and everything in them. Then spoke third, interesting detail, right? Then spoke third, but his greatest work is that he made man and gave him a soul that shall live and never perish, though the body decay to dust or burn to ashes. And all men who are righteous shall live and dwell with him himself in the place called Gimle or Vingolf. But wicked men go to hell and on to Niflhel, that is down in the ninth world. Then spoke Gangleri, what was he doing before heaven and earth were made? Then Hai replied, then he was among the frost giants.
Yeah. So it's the Hrimthursum, that is, it's like the rhyme giants. But the word giant throughout this text is Thirs, which is also it's like a giant, but it's also a kind of a troll. It's also the English word is one of the word. The Old English version of that Thirs is one of the words that's used to describe Grendel. Just by the way.
And Beowulf, yeah. So, okay, this is Odin's origin story within the Gylfi. Obviously, different than it is in the prologue. You know, he's from the Frost Giants. He was hanging out with the Frost Giants back in the day before he made everything, and like this is very Christian, actually, right? He makes heaven and earth and everything in them. That's not really the way that pagans generally...
Somebody should make that into a psalm or something.
Right. I mean, it's almost a quote from the Psalms. Immortal souls? What? Humans don't have immortal souls in paganism. The souls go down to wherever and then gradually fade away until they're gone. Yeah. Yes, I mean, you could say that Norse mythology, just sort of completely independently of all other paganism, completely independently of Christian influence, came up with this stuff, but maybe not. the Occam's razor would suggest that this is clearly Christian influence, whether it's influence that predates Christianization or influence that is happening in Christianization. Yeah. We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah. So let me give an example. This is not in our notes, but I just immediately after this, there's an example of the kind of like the prosymmetrical nature of the text, which I want to give people a sense of, because it is actually, as far as Snorri is concerned, it's the most important thing about the text.
Yes, I know.
So Har said he was then with the rhyme giants. And then Gangleri said, what was the beginning, or how did it began it, or what was before? And then Har answered, that is Hai answered, as is told in Voluspa, which Voluspa is the first poem of the Elder Edda. I'm going to try to read I'm going to try to read this stanza in Old Norse for people.
Okay, everybody. If that's okay. Here we go. All right.
Or var alda, that eki var a sander neser, ne svalar unir, jorð fansk eigi, ne uphimin gap var ginunga en gras eki, which is once was the age when there was nothing. nor sand, nor sea, nor the chilling stream waves. Earth was not found, nor ether heaven, a yawning gap, but of grass there was none.
Whereas you might say the earth was formless and void.
Yeah, one might say. That Ginnunga that we were talking about, before, like the yawning gap, right?
Ginnunga gap,
void.
yeah, the yawning gap. Yeah, the void.
Yeah.
So the next thing, and why don't you read this for us, is the origin of the bad guys, the origin of monsters who are, kind of built into the Norse cosmology.
Yeah. Gangleri spoke, what were things like before generations came to be and the human race was multiplied? Then spoke Hai, these rivers, which are called Elivagar, when they had gotten so far from their source that the poisonous flow, sometimes the word is related to yeast, by the way. This idea of a poisonous flow is like rot or fermentation, something happening like that accompanied them, began to go hard like the clinker that comes from a furnace. It turned to ice, and when this ice came to a halt and stopped flowing, the vapor that was rising from the poison froze on the top in the same direction and turned to rime, and this rime increased layer upon layer right across Ginnungagap.
The yawning gap.
Which again, the yawning gap. Yeah. The word is directly related to our word for yawning. Yeah.
I before you go on, I just want to actually insert this really fun note. The void, right? So this is being written 13th century, late 12th century, maybe. I don't know if we know that. Do we know the exact dates on this text?
Oh, on the
Prose Edda.
Yeah, it's late 12th century, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so in the 15th century, Scandinavians, they convinced that Ginnungagap is an actual geographic location. They decided to go looking for it. And they ultimately decided that it was located somewhere between Greenland, they called it Greenland, and also Vinland, which is their name for the coast of North America. So somewhere between Greenland and Canada, basically, is the void. So I do not recommend you sail there unless you want to see the origins of monsters.
Since nobody will ever go that far north, it's impossible to verify.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. All right, why don't you continue on then?
Yeah. Then spoke just as high. Ginnungagap, the part that faces in a northerly direction, was filled with the weight and heaviness of ice and rime, and there was vapor and a blowing inwards from it. But the southerly part of Ginnungagap cleared up in the face of the sparks and molten particles that came flying out of the world of Muspel. Then spoke third, just as from Niflheim there arose coldness and all things grim, so what was facing close to Muspel was hot and bright, but Ginnungagap was mild as a windless sky. Also a good line, mild as a windless sky. And when the rime and the blowing of the warmth met so that it thawed and dripped, there was a quickening from these flowing drops due to the power of the source of the heat, and it became the form of a man, and he was given the name Ymir. But the frost giants called him Aurgelimir, and from him are descended the generations of frost giants, as it says in the shorter Voluspa. All sibyls are from Vidolf, all wizards are from Vilmaid, all sorcerers from Svarthofdi, and all giants from Ymir come. Then spoke Gangleri, how did generations grow from him, and how did it come about that other people came into being? Or do you believe him to be a god whom you have just spoken of? Then Hai replied, not at all do we acknowledge him to be a god. He was evil, and all his descendants. We call them rime giants. It really is rime giants. Anyway, and it is said that when he slept, that's Rime for those following along at home.
Yes. Giants of Rhyme is my new rap group, by the way.
Yeah, Giants of Rhyme. That'd be pretty rad. They might be Giants of Rhyme even.
There you go.
And it is said that when he slept, he sweated. Then there grew under his left arm a male and a female, and one of his legs begot a son with the other, and descendants came from them. These are the frost giants. The ancient frost giant, him we call Ymir.
So this is much more kind of classically pagan, right? Where you've got creation coming out of some big divine being, you know. In this case, so Ymir is not just a giant. Ymir is the giant, right? He's the giant, as we're going to see, actually, that the world is made out of. But here he's the giant from whom the monsters come, from whom all the other giants come. And I mean, you even get weird stuff like this. One of his legs begets a son with the other. I don't know. I don't want to know how that, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to comment on that part, but the thing that is important about this this little bit from the Voluspo, all the witches spring from Weetolf, and all the warlocks are from Wilharm, and all the spell singers spring from Svarthead, and all the ogres of Ymir come. All ogres of Ymir come is a little more alliterative, but obviously that's not quite right either. It's Jotnar Alir fra Ymir Komnir.
Yeah, Jotun is the basic is another word for giant. That it's the most common word for giant. In Norse stuff. And Jotnar is the plural.
Yeah. Jotnar Alir, all giants. This idea of the giants and the warlocks and the witches, or the magic people, basically, the spell singers, the monsters, they all have a common origin, right? This is a similar idea to what you find in Beowulf, and what the Beowulf poet does is to make them all Cain. Descendants of Cain.
Cain.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun. I mean, a fun fact. I don't know if I should. I'm going to bring it up because it's fun to me. There is this Mormon legend. Do you know about this, Richard?
You know so much more about Mormonism than I do. So
this is not strictly Mormonism in like the sense of like, this is not official. This is a Mormon legend.
Cool.
So it just so happens that Mormon legend brings everything you just said into one thing.
Oh, great.
Yes. It's my favorite Mormon legend. Not that I know lots of them, but this is my favorite one. So one of the early Mormon leaders, I cannot remember which one. Look this stuff up, kids. You can find it. I'm not making this up. He encounters what is basically Bigfoot out in the wilderness somewhere in Western America, and has a conversation with Bigfoot.
This is going to really expand our audience among a certain subset of internet culture, by the way.
That's right. Has a conversation, and it turns out I don't think it says Bigfoot or whatever, but the description is basically like Bigfoot, and it turns out that he's Cain, still wandering the earth. He survived the flood, and that Cain is literally a giant. You know, it's crazy, cool, fun stuff. You know. Anyway, yes, it brings all this together.
That's pretty great. I didn't actually know that.
Well, speaking of floods, then spoke Gangleri. Where did Ymir live, and what did he live on? The next thing, when the rhyme dripped, was that there came into being from it a cow called Audhumla, and 4 rivers of milk flowed from its teats, and it fed Ymir. Then spoke Gangleri. What did the cow feed on? Hai said, it licked the rime stones which were salty, and the first day as it licked stones, there came from the stones in the evening a man's hair. The second day a man's head. The third day there was a complete man there. His name was Buri. He was beautiful in appearance, big and powerful. He begot a son called Bor. He married a wife called Bestla, daughter of the giant Bolthorn, and they had 3 sons. One was called Odin, the second Vili, the third Ve. And it is my belief that this Odin and his brothers must be the rulers of heaven and earth. It is our opinion that this must be what he is called. This is the name of the one who is the greatest and most glorious that we know, and you would do well to agree to call him that too. Then spoke Gangleri, how did they get on together? Which group was the more powerful? Then Hai replied, Bor's sons killed the giant Ymir, and when he fell, so much blood flowed from his wounds that with it they drowned all the race of frost giants, except that one escaped with his household. Giants call him Bergelmir. He went up onto his ark with his wife and was preserved there, and from them are descended the families of frost giants, as it says here, countless winters before the earth was created, then was Bergelmir born. That is the first I remember when that wise giant was laid on a box. So this is the flood story in the Prose Edda. It's blood. The flood is blood from a giant.
It's a flood of blood, and the giants are the ones who escape.
That's right. Noah's a giant, basically. Noah is Bergelmir is the Noah in this story. Yeah. And I mean, what is the origin of Odin here? A cow licks the salty ice until until his dad emerges.
This might be a good example, by the way, of it's a little difficult to say, is this a story that somebody 300 years before Snorri would have recognized in this particular case? And what I mean by that is Snorri it's a good example of Snorri's process, right? So he's got a poem here, which is, this untold ages ere the earth was shapen, there was this guy named Bergelmir, right? And he was a famous, wise giant who was maybe the first person to build a ship, the first person to go in a ship. That's the idea of the poem here.
Yeah.
I think the translation that you just read says laid on a box, but it's on the deck of the ship was laid down in Old Norse is really what it says. And this is important because, of course, this could be a reference to this could be a reference to like he, as a guy who sailed in a ship, but it could also be a reference to a ship burial. And so Snorri has this old poem. Nobody's done a ship burial in Iceland in a long time. He's got this old poem. There's this giant. He's the first person is he the first person to build a ship and sail on it? Or is he the first person to actually be buried, in this way, like on a ship in a ship burial?
Although, or as I say, another direction you could go with this is like you see at the beginning of Beowulf, right? Which of course has a ship burial, but actually you have the culture hero arriving on the boat, right?
Well, so that's the thing. This could be in some way related to all of that, and of course that culture hero Shield shaving, as everybody knows, Sheaf is the fourth son of Noah, who was born on the ark.
That's right.
And so again, as everyone
all
knows,
one thing.
And so it's
I'm learning a lot from you here today, Richard. I really actually. I knew that. I knew that. Yeah.
But I mean, this is the. You could say, like, this is the relationship between. This is how you have to take things in Snorri Edda, because sometimes he's just got this fragmentary poem that could actually mean all these different things, and he's kind of come up with a story. And you could say that culturally people they know there's this guy and they associate him with the ship burial, and maybe that's associated with one of the sons of Noah and the flood of Noah and all these different things. And so Snorri takes it. But the thing we have to remember is that even the frame narrative itself wants you to distrust the explanation that is being given. Right. That this is Odin tricking somebody who might also be Odin, right. And therefore this is not we're not being given to understand that this is actually a reliable, which is a reliable account of the events. And that is actually really important because it gives Snorri this really important out to sort of say, well, like it's a really clever literary way, I think, of saying something to the effect of, well, this is just how I heard it, or basically covering some over the fact, right? The some say, and maybe they say truly, right? That kind of but of course Snorri's doing it in a really clever way. And I don't want to just say like Snorri is just like pulling stuff out of his ear. but also like when he does, he has like a little cover for that. And to me, that's the way in which Snorri is an incredibly clever artist. And it is certainly, this is the kind of cleverness, the kind of boy, the old English word for this kind of cleverness is like, you know, Saruman. That's the old English word to describe somebody who's clever in this way. But it's the idea of someone who has this remember that and this is connective tissue between this poetic tradition and like the Greek poetic tradition. Like they seem to have very different poetic geniuses, but actually the thing that they're both interested in is the person with the weaving mind. Right? Yeah. The person with a clever mind, the person with the weaving mind, which is an attribute of the gods. It's an attribute of the divine. And it's something that poets, as men who have been touched by the divine, this little spark of divine madness, it's a thing that they can do. And it's a thing that Snorri himself is very good at, which is why, by the way, he's also a lawyer.
There you go.
Which is a joke, but also not a joke. Yeah. Like that's there's a reason like all the great law speakers are also great poets, right? It's because you have the kind of you can do the weave, as somebody recently said. You can do this, you can make this kind of weave between different things. And so in my opinion, Snorri seems to be kind of weaving all of those things together as he's doing this retelling. And the poem itself, like the little bit, the Ofri Vedra, that little bit of poem is the thing that's sort of like the certainty. And the story we're getting to explain it, even this story, I think that you can't take it with 100% certainty. You have to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. Yeah.
I mean, it starts out saying it's a tricking.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
who's the object of the trickery here is the big question. Of course, the answer really is the audience.
Yeah. So, okay. I promised everybody that the world is created out of a giant. So tell us how that goes. This is one of my favorite bits, actually.
All right. Then Gangleri replied, "What did Bor's sons do then, if you believe that they are gods?" So Gangleri, he's still skeptical about all of this. Har, that is Hai, said, "There is not just a little to be told about that. They took Ymir and transported him to the middle of Ginnungagap, and out of him made the earth, out of his blood the sea and the lakes. The earth was made of the flesh and rocks of the bones, stone and scree they made out of the teeth and molars of the bones that had been broken." By the way, all the kennings naturally suggest themselves now. You can be like, you can be like, Ymir's molars, right? And it's like, okay, now we know what that would be.
I was traveling along Ymir blood.
I don't know if that's a real, I don't know if Ymir's molars is an actual kenning, but I wouldn't be surprised. Then spoke
it should definitely be some kind of minced oath by Ymir's molars.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Then spoke just as high, out of the blood that came from his wounds and was flowing unconfined. Out of this they made the sea, in which they encompassed and contained the earth, and they placed this sea in a circle round the outside of it, and it will seem an impossibility to most to get across it. Of course, this is the great river ocean.
Which is exactly what we see in Greek mythology as well,
and every ancient culture, really.
Yes, everybody believes that.
It is known. Then spoke third. They also took his skull and made out of it the sky, and set up over the earth with 4 points. By the way, the sky is hard in most ancient cultures.
Right, it's a dome.
It's a dome. It's hard. Set it up over the earth with 4 points, and under each corner they set a dwarf.
As one does.
Well, you got to hold that thing up with something. Their names are Austri, Vestri, Nordri, and Sudri.
So their names are east, west, north, and south, as everybody knows.
They took molten particles and sparks that were flying uncontrolled and had shot out of the world of Muspel. Someone's got to get the Muspelheim situation under control, by the way. And set them in the middle of the firmament of the sky, both above and below, to illuminate heaven and earth. They fixed all the lights, some in the sky, some moved in wandering course beneath the sky. That's what a planet is. The word planet means something that wanders.
Wanderer.
Some moved in a wandering course beneath the sky, but they appointed them positions and ordained their courses. Thus it is said in ancient sources that by means of them days were distinguished, and also the count of years, as it says in Voluspo. The sun did not know where her dwelling was. The moon did not know what power he had. The stars did not know where their places were. This was what it was like above the earth before this took place. It's actually something like, this was it ere the earth was fashioned.
Yeah.
That's that last line is part of the poem.
Yeah. I love the fact that did we include it in this bit? That his clouds are the clouds are made from his brains. I can't remember if that's in this part of it, but yeah,
that will be.
Was that further down?
Yeah, it's a little bit further down.
Okay, yeah.
Of Ymir's flesh, the earth was fashioned, and of his sweat, the sea. This is another like a skaldic poem. Crags of his bones, trees of his hair, and of his skull, the sky. Then of his brows the blithe gods made Midgard for the sons of men, and of his brain the bitter-mooded clouds were all created.
Wow. Yes. So I mean, this is then the passage, and I'm just going to read the bit that came right before what Richard read. That kind of describes the sort of the arrangement of all of creation, right? So then spoke Gangleri, "This is important information that I have just heard. That is an amazingly large construction and skillfully made. How is the earth arranged?" which if he is Odin in disguise, he's saying, "Oh, what a great job Odin has done, and laying everything out like this." Yeah, exactly. There's like hints of that all through this.
I will say I've never the idea that Gangleri might be, and therefore Gylfi might be Odin. Is you can find more about this if you want to in the introduction to Jesse Byock's edition of the Prose Edda. So anyway, people, everybody wants to know sources, which, I don't know if you guys actually look these up or not, but if you want to read more about this, that you can go
just
track that down.
Flash those credentials, Richard.
Yeah, just occasionally.
So then Hai replied, "It is circular around the edge, and around it lies the deep sea, and along the shore of the sea they gave lands to live in to the races of giants." So notice the giants are on the edge. "But on the earth, on the inner side, they made a fortification around the world against the hostility of giants. And for this fortification, they used the giant Ymir's eyelashes." So great. "And they called the fortification Midgard." So Midgard, Midgard, Middle Earth, that's what this is. "They also took his brains and threw them into the sky and made out of them the clouds," as it says here. And then that bit from Voluspa, which Richard just read. The skull and brains, and I don't know. This is so. I mean, it's just a dismemberment of a giant. This is how the world is made in this myth.
What's interesting is that
I was going to say, this is like in some ways the Greek version, right?
Yeah,
where you've got Gaia, this the Earth goddess, right? Bits of her get taken apart and whatever.
And Cronus and
exactly.
Well, I mean, you also get to even take this at a more universal history level, the idea that the reason that the island of Britain is also called Albion is because there was a giant named Albion who initially ruled there, and they sort of kill him, and that allows them to establish civilization on the Isles. So, there's this usually this idea of like a chaos kampf, the idea that you have to like kill the serpent to establish culture or something like that. But there's a variant of that, which is you have to kill the giant to establish the world or to establish the city. And that seems to be part of maybe what's going on here. How are we doing on time?
We're an hour and a half in. So I think this will be a little long. A little bit of a longish episode, but I think we can get through the rest of this.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So we don't have to send Trudy and Simon home just yet.
Okay. All right.
If everything just suddenly goes black, everybody, you'll know what Trudy and Simon have done to us.
Yes. Just cutting them off because it's getting weird now.
Exactly. It's getting a little too weird. All right. Yeah. So next, it gets even weirder. And that's the creation of humanity. Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and read about how we came about according to Norse myth?
Then spoke Gangleri. A great deal, it seems to me, they had achieved when earth and heaven were made, and sun and stars were put in position, and days were separated. And where did the people come from who inhabit the world? Then Hai replied, as Bor's sons walked along the seashore, they came across 2 logs and created people out of them. The first gave breath and life, the second consciousness and movement, the third a face, speech, and hearing and sight. They gave them clothes and names. The man was called Ask, the woman Embla, and from them were produced the mankind to whom the dwelling place under Midgard was given. After that, they made themselves a city in the middle of the world, which is known as Asgard. We call it Troy. There, the gods and their descendants lived, and there took place as a result many events and developments, both on earth and aloft. In the city, there is a seat called Hlidskjalf, and when Odin sat in that throne, he saw all over the worlds and every man's activity, and understood everything he saw. His wife was called Frigg, Fjordvin's daughter, and from them is descended the family line that we call the Asir race, who have resided in old Asgard and the realms that belong to it, and all the whole line of descent is of divine origin. And this is why he can be called All-Father, that he is the father of all the gods and of men and of everything that has been brought into being by him and his power. The earth was his daughter and his wife. Out of her he begot the first of his sons, that is Asa Thor. This is a pretty common epithet for Thor, is Asa Thor. He was possessed of power and strength. As a result, he overcomes all living things.
So instead of being made out of the dust of the earth, as you see in Genesis, humanity is made out of a couple of old logs. Basically, it's driftwood. We're made from driftwood along the beach. But it's interesting. Notice the first man is called Ask, and the woman is Embla, and this is Ash and Elm, right? That the first 2 people are basically they have tree names. Isn't that right? Ash and Elm.
Yeah, and this is pretty. That is that's a trope that comes up a lot in lots of different cultures, by the way.
Yeah. Trees are people are trees.
It's even in like Lithuanian fairy tales, for instance.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, we should absolutely do an episode.
Yeah, for sure.
On Agla, Queen of Serpents. Oh man, that would be such a great fairy tale.
I even have a cool retelling of it.
How about that?
Yeah.
So that's the origin of humanity. Comes off a little bit better than in some tales. There's actually the gods are actually paying attention to creating mankind and seem to care about them a little bit. Again, this might be a little bit of a Christianization. Maybe not. Yeah. It's again we don't know exactly. Okay, so here's a bit. Now this I wanted to include this especially because this is something that maybe a lot of people have heard of who have not delved into this creation stuff that we've just were reading. And that's about, probably a lot of people call it Bifrost or Bifrost. This is the original Rainbow Bridge, okay? Which...
This is the one your pets cross when they die? Is that...
Yeah, I'm going to just go ahead.
Is that Orthodox theology?
This is not ruining Sunday school. This is ruining Highmark theology. The Rainbow Bridge has nothing to do with pet heaven. In fact, I looked this up recently. The origins of this whole Rainbow Bridge
I
thing.
would love to know.
Yes. So actually, it seems to have arisen from a poem that a lady wrote, I think in the late 50s, to commemorate her dog and whom she loved, which, I mean, I have no problem with people who love their animals. That's fine. And she included this language of the Rainbow Bridge. And apparently she shared copies of it with her friends, but her name was not on it. And so as a result, it got shared and shared and shared. And then sometime, I think in the 1990s only, one of these columnists, I don't think it was Dear Abby, but like one of these kinds of newspaper columnists included the poem, unattributed. Somebody eventually did hunt this down and find out who it was that actually wrote. I don't remember the lady's name off the top of my head. And it was because it appeared in that newspaper column just in the 90s. That's when it starts to become crazy popular. So this whole Rainbow Bridge idea for sort of pet heaven is now I'm confused. Is younger than you are, Richard.
I'm just confused. Like in the original poem, like was the pet a great warrior, and so they've gone to
no
Valhalla? Like what's the deal?
No, yeah, it's just literally using the image and then completely applying it to something totally different, totally different. Okay, wow. All right, Bifrost.
Okay, yeah,
I know.
I'm a little traumatized.
This is not like, as you know, this is not ruining Sunday school as Father Stephen DeYoung puts it, because this is not a Sunday school thing. But this is, I don't know. I'm sorry, people.
I see it on Facebook all the time. My pet has crossed the Rainbow Bridge.
The Rainbow Bridge.
Like, what?
Why why would Heimdall let your pet across?
Again, if your pet was a great warrior, I guess I could understand.
Then spoke Gangleri. What way is there to heaven from earth? Then Hai replied, laughing, that is not an intelligent question. Has no one ever told you that the gods built a bridge to heaven from earth called Bifrost?
By the way, this is also a good line. That's not an intelligent question. Hasn't anyone ever told you?
As everyone knows. You must have seen it. Maybe it is what you call the rainbow. It has 3 colors and great strength and is built with art and skill to a greater extent than other constructions. And strong as it is, yet it will break when Muspel's lads go and ride it. It's basically the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
Again, this
horses
situation is out of control.
Yes. Muspel, everybody. We didn't cover the origin of Muspel, but this is basically a kind of a world of like volcanic explosions constantly. That's essentially what Muspel is basically, volcano land.
Yeah. They had volcanoes, in Iceland.
Yeah. And strong as it is, yet it will break when Muspel's lads go and ride it, and their horses will have to swim over great rivers. That is how they will advance. Then spoke Gangleri, it does not seem to me that the gods built the bridge in good faith if it is liable to break, considering that they can do as they please. Then spoke Hai, and this is very interesting. The gods are not deserving of blame for this work. Bifrost is a good bridge, but there is nothing in this world that will be secure when Muspel's sons attack. The gods are not omnipotent. They are subject to the monsters.
This is Tolkien's got some wonderful bits about this in his Monsters and the Critics essay.
Yeah.
From earlier on in the Gylfi, the little bit that we get, let me just share. He who sits there, that is in Muspel, at the land's end to defend the land is called Surtur. He brandishes a flaming sword, and at the end of the world he shall go forth and harry, and overcome all the gods and burn all the world with fire. Thus is said in Völuspá, Surtur fares from the south with a switch-eating flame. On his sword shimmers the sun of the war gods. The rock crags crash. The fiends are reeling. Heroes tread hell way. Heaven is cloven.
Wow, that Muspel situation really is out of control.
And it's in Old Norse, it's like Surtur fer sunan med sviga live. It's just like it's a good poem. It goes hard, as the kids say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. We're moving on at breakneck speed here. We have to do something about the world tree. We got to do a little bit of, although honest, again, why don't we do a whole episode about this? But let's cover it in brief here right now. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So then spoke Gangleri, where's the chief center or holy place of the gods? Hai replied, it is at the Ash Yggdrasil, where the gods must hold their courts each day. So,
this is the all thing of Asgard.
Yeah. One important feature of European paganism that we do seem to know is that it was dendrocentric isn't right.
It went super into temples.
Yeah.
It was gathering around trees.
Right. Yeah. Sacred groves. I mean, this is true of a lot of pagan religions, right? They have sacred groves. It's at the Ash Yggdrasil. There the gods must hold their courts each day. Then spoke Gangleri, what is there to tell about that place? Then said, just as high. The ash is of all trees the biggest and best. Its branches spread out over all the world and extend across the sky. 3 of the tree's roots support it and extend very, very far. One is among the Asir, the second among the frost giants, where Ginnungagap once was. The third extends over Niflheim. Under that root is Hervergmir. Sorry. Just because you study these languages does not mean you can always say the words. And Nidhogg gnaws the bottom of the root. But under the root that reaches towards the frost giants is where Mimir's well is, which has wisdom and intelligence contained in it. And the master of the well is called Mimir. Hence it's Mimir's well.
Yeah.
He is full of learning because he drinks of the well from the horn Gjallarhorn. Allfather went there and asked for a single drink from the well, but he did not get one until he placed his eye as a pledge. Thus it says in Völuspá, I know it all, Odin, where you deposited your eye, in that renowned well of Mimir. Mimir drinks mead every morning from Valfather's pledge. Know you yet, or what? The third root of the ash extends to heaven, and beneath that root is a well which is very holy, called Weird's Well. There the gods have their court. Every day the Asir ride there up over Bifrost, as it is also called the Osbridge.
Wow, most expensive drinking fountain ever. That'll be one eye, please.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's,
this is...
I was going to say, that's weird, too. It's bizarre. Like, Mimir is drinking mead from where the eye is there in the well.
I mean, this is like, to me, this is like one of the best bits. Certainly,
yes.
like, it's one of of all the sort of visions of Norse mythology, or like mental visions of Norse mythology. I think this is probably one of the strongest.
Yeah,
the Odin giving up his eye for wisdom, right? And then so usually when Odin appears in the sagas, he appears as like a one-eyed old man, one-eyed stranger.
This
one-eyed
is
warrior.
definitely, as all the Facebook reels and TikToks call it, this is definitely an iconic moment. It seems like. Thank you.
So Father Andrew was making a little pun there off of the word "I," and just in case.
Okay, all right. I know what all the kids came here for.
Okay.
They want to hear about Loki, right?
Okay, if this channel is going to become like one of those Hiddles Love channels or whatever, which is the name of the Tom Hiddleston fandom.
Hiddles Love.
I can have no part.
This is not Hiddelheim, everybody. So
yeah,
no. But we know you came here to hear some Loki, so this is just a little bit of fan service. No. Actually, Loki, it turns out, as we're going to hear, Loki has something to do with the shape of the whole world, which is, again, basically the theme on which we chose the passages that we're discussing. So,
right.
Okay, Loki. That one is also reckoned among the Aesir, who some call the Aesir's calumniator and originator of deceits and the disgrace of all gods and men. His name is Loki, or Lopt, son of the giant Farboti. Lauvi, or Nal, is his mother. Beleist and Helblindi are his brothers. Loki is pleasing and handsome in appearance, evil in character, very capricious in behavior. He possessed to a greater degree than others the kind of learning that is called cunning and tricks for every purpose. Maybe he's into writing poetry. He was always getting the Aesir into a complete fix and often got them out of it by trickery. Sigyn is the name of his wife, Nari or Narvi, their son, and Loki had other offspring too. There was a giantess called Angerboda in Giantland, or Jotland, which also is a town in New Jersey. No kidding. I drive right through Jutland whenever I go east towards New York from here. With her, Loki had 3 children. Oh, it turns out Loki gets around a little bit. One was Fenriswolf, the second Jormungandr, i.e. the Midgard serpent, and the third is hell. And when the gods realized that these three siblings were being brought up in giant land, and when the gods traced prophecies stating that from these siblings great mischief and disaster would arise for them, then they all felt evil was to be expected from them to begin with because of their mother's nature, but still worse because of their father's. That's, your mother was a giant and your father was the god of deceit and trickery. Yeah, I mean, what a trio of siblings, right? You've got the Fenris wolf, you've got the Midgard serpent, and you've got Hel herself. That's right, kids. In Norse mythology, the devil is a woman. So, yes.
The goddess, the ruler of the underworld is a woman.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting. Even in the Christian depiction, is the devil and Hades the same being,
right?
Or two separate ones? Or
there's definitely this idea of Surtur as also being kind of like a sort of traditionally demonic figure. Like he comes from the hot place. He's gonna burn the world. Like all these different like that's also there. But as far as like the place where you go when you die, like the domain, well, most bad people and boring people.
That's right. It's a sin to be boring in Norse mythology.
Yeah, well, it doesn't help. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, Norse mythology really is the mythology where by default everyone goes to hell.
Right.
Which kind of, there are some versions of Christianity out there like that. All right, so okay, we're gonna wrap it up. I know this has been a great.
I have a lot to say about Loki, but maybe we'll just save it for.
Yes, we could do like a whole Loki thing.
All right.
But here, the last bit about Loki, which Loki actually has contributions to the shape of the world, in addition to his three children, who all actually have something to do with the shape of the world, which we'll talk about more at another time. So why don't you read this last bit here?
Then all father sent the gods to get the children and bring them to him. And when they came to him, he threw the serpent into that deep sea which lies around all lands. And a serpent grew so that it lies in the midst of the ocean, encircling all lands, and bites its own tail. If you've ever seen that image.
Yes.
Hel he threw into Niflheim and gave her authority over 9 worlds, such that she has to administer board and lodging to those sent to her. And that is... I'm sorry, this is just so funny. This is sort of like, what do I do with this horrible monster? I know you can run the worst B&B of all time.
The host is Hel.
Administer board and lodging to all those sent to her, and that is those who die of sickness or old age. So again, if you die in a boring way, straight to hell with one L.
Straight to hell.
She has great mansions there, and her walls are exceptionally high, and the gates great. Her hall is called Eluthnir. Her dish, hunger. Her knife, famine. The servant, Ganglati, serving maid, Ganglot. Her threshold where you enter, stumbling block. Her bed, sick bed. Her curtains, gleaming bale. She is half... I'm sorry. Do you know the bit from The Office where Dwight... I'm really sorry. Where Dwight is talking about his power fantasy, and it turns out he's like managing a B&B in hell or whatever. That's it's literally this. She is half black and half flesh colored, thus she is easily recognizable, and rather downcast and fierce looking.
Wow. All right, we're gonna stop here. Although there's so many stories so famous that we've skipped over, right? I mean, there's Thor's fishing trip. That's one of my favorites, which seems to echo stuff in Job, in the book of Job. Mm-hmm. There's the death of Balder. There's Odin hanging on the world tree. There's Ragnarok, on and on. I promise everybody, we're going to get back to all of that stuff. By
the way, the servants of hell, Ganglati and Ganglot, it just means like the lazy walkers. In other words, the service is terrible.
It's like, yes.
It's just like, again, it's just like the worst place you could possibly
visit. Howard Johnson
of, yeah.
The hellish Howard Johnson. Yeah. So yeah, I think this needs to become a running gag, actually.
You can't create running gags. You just have to let them.
I know. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but anyways, our point was to give an introduction, everybody, to Norse mythology and to the Prose Edda in particular. So, I've been looking at the chat. It's been super, super active, everybody. We're glad that
do we have highlights? I know we've gone long. Is there? I don't watch the chat while we talk because I'm already distracted by other things.
We had some kind of neo-pagan bro show up for a while and lecture everybody, but he got put in timeout forever.
Oh boy.
God bless you. It's okay. It's all right.
Hey, Carl.
It's all right. We love you. Yeah, I mean, I saw one person, there's so much here, it's hard for me to kind of sift through it, but one person was saying that they really love this podcast. And already, even though we've just started it just a few weeks ago, yeah, we're glad y'all are here. This is another one of these moments. It's like, I can't believe that I get to do this, right? That literally we get to look into cameras and microphones. And just
I'm really actually just stoked that we had a neo-pagan bro show up to try to. Oh, that's so great. That's so great.
I know.
Right, well,
I know.
God bless you.
Yes.
Hope you figure your stuff out and come to the true philosophy.
Exactly. Do what your Norse ancestors did.
Do it. Do what all the great pagans did and get baptized.
Get baptized. So yeah, one person comments that really what's happening with this podcast is I have simply joined your book club. What do you think about that? You have any comments about that, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I really do think of this as kind of an extension. I've had this show for about the last 3 years that I've done with our mutual friend Jonathan Pajot about once a month, where we basically look at things, but usually we have like an hour to do it, and it's got to be at a really high level. And so this just is an excuse for me to talk about these things at a much much deeper. But I really think that in all seriousness, the siloing that has happened in academia around the study of these kinds of things has really, really hurt our ability to understand the ancient and medieval world and the kind of the really beautiful synthesis that the medieval project achieved. And so trying to help people get their head around that synthesis and the way that it happens in places as diverse as 14th century Iceland and 6th century Ethiopia, for instance. That's the thing that really gives me a lot of joy. And it is a way of actually raising a glass to my own ancestors and raising the horn to them and saying, thank you for becoming Christians.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing is, like, I know that for a certain subset of folks, texts like this seem like, before they open them, seem like an impenetrable academic thing that only academics would do and whatever. And the truth is that these stories were always for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what we're trying to do here is bring this stuff because we get a lot of joy out of it. A lot of joy. That's why it's just so fun to do this. One person, just as an example of that, one person making a joke. We encourage everybody in the chat, by the way, make jokes about the things that we're saying. That's absolutely appropriate for these conversations. One person says, Sam Cook says that Ymir practically had his head in the clouds. Well, you're getting it's actually the clouds are in his head. Yes.
In Mother Russia, the clouds. Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Don't throw your brains up; they'll turn into clouds, son. So, yeah. This is gonna be fun. Okay. Well, let's wrap it up here at the end. I have one last passage actually, and this is indeed the very end of the Gylfi. So skip to the end, and it goes like this. Next, Gangleri heard great noises in every direction from him, and he looked out to one side. And when he looked around further, he found he was standing out on open ground, could see no hall and no castle. Then he went off on his way and came back to his kingdom and told of the events he had seen and heard about. And from his account, these stories passed from one person to another. But the Aesir sat down to discuss and hold a conference. In other words, they had a thing. And went over all these stories that had been told him and assigned those same names that were mentioned above to the people and places that were there, that is to say, in Sweden. So that when long periods of time had passed, men should not doubt that they were all the same, those Aesir about whom stories were told above, and those who were now given the same names. So someone there was given the name Thor, and this means the ancient Thor of the Aesir, that is, Oku Thor. And to him are attributed the exploits which Thor, Hector, performed in Troy. And it is believed that the Turks told tales about Ulysses, and that they gave him the name Loki, for the Turks were especially hostile to him. That's the last line of the Gylfi. To me, that's like a surprise ending to identify Ulysses with Loki. Now, if you know about the twisty stuff, yes, right, the man of twists and turns, then of course that makes total sense. Total sense.
The Western tradition, Ulysses, obviously Odysseus, comes across as a much more sinister figure. And the reason for this is basically because they stopped being able to read Homer, but they knew that the Trojans were the good guys. And Ulysses, he's the one that came up. Now in Homer, Ulysses he's definitely a hero, but also like this very ambiguous character. He is constantly plotting and scheming things, and a lot of times people around him don't like it so much. But that's just the kind of person that he is. We talked about that in our last episode. But what eventually happens is that you have this kind of Western or Latin tradition, which would be the version of the Trojans, the matter of Rome that they call it the matter of Rome, right? That's that the Scandinavians have received, in which Ulysses or Odysseus is kind of a bad dude, and in fact is imprisoned in one of the lowest rings of hell in Dante's Divine Comedy. So it's a very kind of different version of the character. In fact, I was talking to somebody after last episode, and they'd come across this, and they were really shocked, and were like, "Why is Odysseus suddenly the bad guy and everything?" But yeah, we will do a couple of episodes on the Divine Comedy at some point, maybe like 3 episodes.
I mean, folks, you can write to us. By the way, we haven't mentioned this too often, but you can write to us at Great Tales. I think the Great Tales may also work at ancientfaith.com, and tell us, what would you like to have I mean, we have a list, but absolutely we will add stuff to the list. So tell us what you'd like to hear episodes about.
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. There's so many things. I mean, I think for our first 20 episodes, we're going to keep saying, we'll have to do an episode about that. We'll have to do an episode about that, because there's just so much. So, but okay. So here's a couple of big questions I think to ask of this. So what does this show us about how Christians can come to terms with the pagan stories of their cultural history? What do you think?
See my published works. No.
Wow, you're ready to be an academic. Buy my book. Yeah.
Except all my stuff is on. So honestly, seriously, again, the reason that I have these conversations, and I've been doing the universal history work that I've been doing, the courses of Symbolic World, and this show with you, like all of that stuff is of a piece, because for me, these are things that there's no way to effectively talk about this in an academic setting, number one. Right. And number two, number two, there's the thing I'm really actually interested in is growing up to be my dear friend Dr. Martin Shaw. Now I can't, because I'm not willing to do the things that happened to him. Like, I don't want to live the life that he had to live to become the person that he is.
I've heard some stories about it. Like he himself is turning into a legend.
He is. Well, and so the great thing is that when you'd hear him tell some of these stories, which I just had an amazing opportunity over the course of the last several weeks to just listen to him tell a bunch of stories, both from Celtic mythology and also like saints' lives and things like that. for one of our courses. And what he did, what he does is so beautiful, and it's extraordinary. What I'm doing is somewhere upstream of that, but also downstream of that, which is trying to help people see the ways in which these things are connected and which they still relate to their lives, because it's not your Christianity that makes you feel like these stories have nothing to do with you. Be like Christianity is not like some other universe that's far removed from all of this other stuff.
Right.
It's your modernity.
Yeah,
and
it's all one world.
Right. And it's the fact that we're conditioned to sort of think about the world in these totally different ways that make these kinds of stories and this kind of poetry, and the idea that you would actually maybe sit around a fire and even tell a story like this, totally implausible. And so what I've been trying to do is to do the explainy bits so that somebody who's a better storyteller than me can do the storytelling bits.
Yeah.
And I am trying to do the storytelling pieces too. But anyway, I just say all that to say, you shouldn't even feel like you need to come to terms. That's what I really want to say. You don't have to come to terms with this stuff, because one, your ancestors already did. Two, this is God's world.
Yes.
Right? And therefore these are our stories.
Right.
Right. So you don't feel like you need to come to terms with it. Just read it. Like I can sit down and read this stuff or tell the stories to my kids. And because my children have grown up in a Christian home, they know Dad's telling a story right now. And this is not the same as, the book of Genesis. But also, they're going to notice the things. They're going to say, this is kind of like Genesis,
Yep.
Or this is really different, or I sure am glad that this is not actually my religion, or, like you don't have to come to terms with this stuff. And in most cases, kids get it. They get it. They understand what's going on. They understand the difference between this kind of story and this kind of story. And I think that, in most cases, we do not need to be afraid. I tried to make the argument when we were talking about the Iliad that there's a direct connection, and I don't remember if I said this explicitly or not, but there's a direct connection between Homer and Holy Week. And that actually, I don't think I said this explicitly, the hymns of Holy Week, and the narrative and the things that we do ritually of Holy Week, if you take them all together, that's the great Christian epic. But it is impossible without Homer. So much so that when Christians are reading Homer in the Byzantine era, they're saying things like, oh, this seems to be sort of like a pagan Holy Week. Right? Yeah. We talked about how it's like the idea of like a pagan fall story, but it's also a pagan Holy Week. I mean, you have, and so other people, scholars have noticed that there's all of these times when Thetis is like bemoaning her son because his life is going to be so short. Well, throughout Holy Week, we have a whole category of hymn called the Stavro Theotokia, which is the Theotokos doing exactly that, but then the last line is almost always, but I trust you know what you're doing. I trust in the resurrection, even though it seems impossible, and even though it seems like that those two things are connected. You really, I'm not saying the events wouldn't have happened, but what I'm saying is that we wouldn't have the poetic diction. We wouldn't have the storytelling capacity as a civilization to make holy work what it is, which I believe that the hymns of Holy Week in the Orthodox Church are the supreme work of world literature. They're more than that, but they're not less than that.
Yeah.
And they're in stronger continuity with Homer than anything that's ever happened in the West, for obvious historical and linguistic reasons. But in any case, now I'm talking about Homer again, but that's okay because so is Snorri. So anyway, I would just say, don't feel like you need to come to terms. Read the stories, enjoy the stories, tell the stories, but also feel free to play with them, because Snorri did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing we read today, except for the poetry part of it, is something that some Old Norse pagan would have probably picked up or heard or read, right?
Yeah.
This is Snorri's retelling in his elaborate little frame within the frame within the frame device. And again, at the end of the day, who's being deceived? Well, maybe ultimately the readers. But here's the thing. Readers and listeners, when we hear a story, we want to be fooled a little bit. That's what fiction is. We want to sort of be like, oh, yeah, obviously that didn't happen. But like, what if it did, though?
Right. Yeah.
So,
secondary belief, as
secondary belief. Yeah.
Professor Tolkien puts it. Yeah. And you know, to me, I think the way, like, it's clear that what Snorri is doing, he's just simply putting all the stories together that that define his world, right? So the Bible, Homer, and you know, this Norse inheritance, it's all just one for him, right? And I think that one of the big problems of the modern world, or the postmodern, whatever era we're in now, one of the big problems of the now, whatever we're supposed to call it, I don't know. I guess in 100 years, people will refer to.
You can never accurately name the era that you're in.
Yeah.
I
think one of the big problems is that everything has become so fragmented. And then you mentioned this, like there's a siloing in academia. So the story has gotten fragmented in academia. It's just playing out. It's fractal. You know, it's playing out on all levels. And I think that one of the things that Christianity brings to this world in this moment is it's defragmenting. It's bringing all the things together, and all that is good gets refined and glorified, and all that is bad gets burned away. Right. This is what it says in Scripture. This is what St. Paul says, right?
It's also what St. Patrick's guardian angels told him, by the way. In a story I will tell you some other time.
In a later day. So I think that, like, we can, it's not just, you know, it's not just old myths and legends that you can do this with. That's not what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
It's really that bringing all these things together, and especially orienting ourselves towards what is oldest, actually makes us whole. You know, it's the common inheritance that we all have. It brings people together around what is true and what is eternal, what is permanent, the good things, the good habits, the old ways. All these things come together and are healing humanity, I think. And so, like, some people might say, well, you know, pop culture is all garbage compared to this. And there's a certain level on which that is true. But I think that that was probably always true on some level at every era, is that most of everything is garbage. It was an old saying in the early days of the internet, before there was much social media, when there was just an ancient thing called Usenet. I think it was, the saying was, 90% of everything is crap, which might have been a quote from somewhere else, and that's just fine. And I think that maybe is almost always true. And so, like, what we're looking at is the stuff that's been kept all this time. We're not looking at the stuff that fell away, that burned away. We're keeping the stuff that kept all this time. But I also think the fact that we're in a media age, there is a proliferation of low quality garbage, maybe greater than the world has ever seen. Fine. Well, like we said, the moose spell situation is out of control.
One might even say man is born to poor pop culture adaptations as the sparks fly upward.
Amen. But I think that still we can do the same kind of thing.
Come on, chat. That was together. Like a little Moosepel and Book of Job. Like, come on, guys. Come on.
Yes, you'll do it. So this has been a great episode, and I look forward to a lot more of this. Yeah. Great chat today, Richard.
Thanks very much, Father. Thanks everyone for tuning in today to our Prose Edda introduction. If you were edified by this conversation, please, down in the doobly-doo, like, subscribe, share, ring the little bell, all the stuff. You guys know YouTube. If you're listening also on a podcast, please just like, subscribe, share, review. Our main home is YouTube, but we're also on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Muspelheim, and other places as well.
And if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you click the little bell when you subscribe.
So you get the aforementioned bell.
Is notified every time that we put out a new episode,
and
which
then
is twice
the bell,
a month.
And you won't have to ask for whom the bell tolls.
It tolls for thee.
Yeah, to tell you that there's a new episode.
Next time, we're going to welcome our good friend, Deacon Nicholas Kotar, who we cannot stop from inviting to podcast.
Our first celebrity guest. And
right.
I think it's kind of fun. Like if we could get a bishop on as well, then we'd have the ranks, you know, like we'd have
That's right. So he's going to come on and talk to us about some Russian fairy tales. I don't know which ones yet. I need to poke him and say, hey, send us some texts. But some Russian fairy tales.
All right. Well, look forward to that, everyone. Farewell. And may you always trace the silhouette of virtue in everything that you read.
This has been a listener and viewer supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.